Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. Have I got a middle of the night, early morning bonus upload for you? Before we get into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and the membership are in the description below. Merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They all were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all of these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and yeah, they really matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into tonight's middle of the night bonus, shall we? Tonight we are going to dive into a little bit of, well, testimony from people that were associated with the Roswell incident. Testimony of Mr. Glenn Dennis, September 2000. Mr. Dennis was a mortician in Roswell, New Mexico in July of 1947, the time of the famous Roswell crash. The mortuary officer from the Roswell Army Airfield called him, asking for hermetically sealed infant caskets, but never explained why. Later that day, when at the airfield for an emergency, he saw debris of unknown origin. A nurse whom he knew described to him the bodies of extraterrestrials she had just handled at the base. GD is Mr. Glenn Dennis, RS is Ralph Steiner. GD. Well, our mortuary had the contract for all military services out at the Roswell Army Airfield. This gentleman called and said he was the mortuary officer at the base and he needed some information, and I said, "What do you need?" He said, "How many hermetically sealed infant caskets do you have? 3.5 to 4 foot in stock." I said, "We don't have any." "How long would it take you to get them?" I said, "Well, I can call by 3:30 this afternoon and have them here in the morning." I said, "What is going on?" And he said, "That is not important." Then he called back later and said, "I need more information." And he wanted to know what embalming chemicals that would alter the tissue, the stomach contents, and what was our preparation for taking care of bodies that were lying out in the elements for several days. And I said, "You are the mortuary officer, and you're asking me?" I was trying to find out who I was talking to. Later on in the day, I got an emergency. When I arrived at the base, there were 3 Field Army Air Force ambulances backed up against the ramp. We were walking up the ramp, and I saw a lot of debris. And when I checked in, I said, "Sir, it looked like we had a crash. Do I need to get ready for it?" And he said, "Who in the hell are you, and what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I had an emergency, and we have a contract for all military services. And it looks like you had a crash." He just said, "Stay right here, don't move." So I stayed there. And pretty soon he came back with 2 military police and said, "Get this guy off of the base. He's not supposed to be here." Whatever happened, all the doctors and nurses that were stationed here in that area were given the orders not to report. It was my understanding that the reason for this was that there was all of these specialists who had been sent in from Wright-Patterson. So evidently I was involved in things that I should not have been involved in. I knew this nurse, and this nurse did not get her orders not to report. She met 2 pathologists from Wright-Patterson. They were examining what was brought in from the UFO crash, what we call the Roswell crash. And they said, "Lieutenant, we still need some help, and this is what you are going to do." And they wanted her. So they'd turn a hand from the ET and she would say 4 fragile fingers, so many centimeters, etc. She said she wasn't in there for over 20 to 30 minutes at the most. And then all of their eyes started burning and their skin was getting really warm and really hot. So they had no idea what they had. And the 2 pathologists said there wasn't anything in the anatomy books like this. There wasn't anything like that in our medical schools. They had never seen anything like this. Immediately after the ET bodies were put in these pouches are us. And the nurse actually described for you what they look like. GD, yeah, when the MPs were taking me out down the hall, that's when she came out of a supply room with a towel over her face, and that's when she screamed, "Glenn, get out of here as fast as you can." I met her the next morning at the officers' club in a conference room, and that's when she gave me this little diagram of what was going on and what they look like. And it looks like what you see today. Most of the little diagrams, 4 fragile fingers and long arms and large eyes. She said that the heads were almost completely demolished, but they could see they only had 2 orifices. They did not have earlobes. They had 2 ear canals. The mouth was about 1 inch, and that's the way she described it to me. And I was with her until about 11:30 that day. And then at 3:30 that afternoon, her supervisor called me and said, "Your friend has been transferred out." And I have her military serial number and everything else, but I never have found her to this day. I've never made contact with her. She had been planning to join a convent, and I imagine they discharged her and let her go. It's a good place to keep somebody quiet. One of the MPs took me aside, and he just said, "Look, mister, you don't go and start any rumors. Nothing happened down here." And he said, "If you do, there'll be real serious problems." The way my character was at the time, I just said, "I'm a civilian, and you can go to hell." And that's when he said, "You may be the one going to hell." He said somebody would be picking my bones out of the sand if I talked. The material I saw from the crash did not look like aluminum or stainless steel. What it looked like, of course, we didn't have in those days. It was a really light gray, almost white, and some of it was really dark. It looked more like what fiberglass might look like today. And it wasn't dented or anything. It looked like it had been twisted and shredded and all this kind of stuff, but I did not see any really sharp dents. I know it was very thin. I could see that it was very, very thin. One of those sergeants out there said, "Well, let him go to hell. Nobody is going to believe him anyway. Nobody is going to believe this happened." Testimony of Lieutenant Walter Haut, United States Navy, September 2000. First Lieutenant Haut was the public information officer at the Roswell Army Air Base in Roswell, New Mexico, when an extraterrestrial vehicle crashed in nearby Corona. He was the individual who put out the original story that a flying disc had crashed there. That story was retracted the next day. We had in our possession a flying saucer. It was found on a ranch up north of Roswell. It was being flown to General Remy's office, that being the next higher command, the 8th Air Force, and that was the end of it. The information that I got was given to me almost verbatim by Colonel Blanchard. He read off a scratch pad that he had in front of him, and I was writing it down. After we got all through with it, I was kind of in awe. I learned that they put all of the hunks and pieces of the crashed ETV in an aircraft, and it was flown out. But after the press release went out, I got call after call after call. The cover-up was pretty well orchestrated. I think the thought of handling it that way came down from Washington through channels, and we were told that we were all wrong, that it was just a weather balloon. I think that there was lots and lots of cover-ups. My sincere feeling is that it was something from outer space, and the military decided that our public may not accept it very graciously. Something coming from outer space and hitting our own Earth. It's a little bit hard to get many people to accept. Testimony of Buck Sergeant Leonard Prco, U.S. Air Force, November 2000. Buck Sergeant Prco was trained in communication and served at Hickam Field in Hawaii. In the early 50s, at an outdoor theater with over 250 people present, 9 silver discs were seen by everyone randomly moving over the entrance to Pearl Harbor. The event lasted for about 10 minutes. At another time, he explains that he befriended one of General Douglas MacArthur's personal bodyguards, who told him that MacArthur had seen the craft and extraterrestrial bodies from the Roswell crash. Everyone turned and looked to the right and over the entrance of Pearl Harbor. There were 9 silver discs. The first sighting that we had was one of the letter L. Before we knew it, they were going this way and that way, and they were making all kinds of maneuvers. It lasted about 10 minutes. Everybody just kept looking. We had some colonel get up and said, "Don't worry about it, folks. Those are just spotlights." Well, being an idiot like me, I jumped up and said, "Colonel, what do you mean spotlights? There are no clouds. There is no beam of light coming from any place." He told me to shut up. Just then a bird colonel jumped up. His name was Miller. And he said, "Colonel, you shut up. You aren't going to fool the people here. They are all military." So we watched the things for 10 minutes and they just took off. These things, they were really fast. There were times that we read in the Honolulu newspaper that they had tracked these objects once going from Hawaii to Japan in 8 minutes. He said to me, "You know that I am a member of General Douglas MacArthur's security guard. I am on my way to the States for TDY." General Douglas MacArthur was very familiar with the Roswell incident, the crash material, and also the bodies because he himself had seen them. That is what he told me. From that day on, I never mentioned a word until about 5 years ago. In the military, they do ridicule you, and I was ridiculed a few times about these UFO events. I was told that I would never make Master Sergeant if I brought this crap up again. My superior said, "If you keep this crap up, you'll never make Master Sergeant. You'll get your orders for tech, but you'll never make Master Sergeant. They'll force you out of the military." Testimony from Mr. Dan Willis, United States Navy, March of 2001. Testimony of Mr. Dan Willis, United States Navy, March 2001. Mr. Dan Willis was in the Navy from 1968 to 71 with a top-secret crypto level 14 security clearance. Later, he worked for 13 years at the Naval Electronic Engineering Center in San Diego. He tells of a time when he received a most unusual communications from a merchant marine ship near the Alaskan coast. The message said that there were these reddish-orange glowing objects about 70 feet in diameter that came out of the ocean and shot off into space. It was tracked on radar going 7,000 miles an hour. Many years later, Mr. Willis relayed this story to someone he knew who had previously worked at NORAD. He said that there were occasions where objects would be tracked on NORAD radar going so fast that they were off the scale. And once, when this happened, one of his older supervisors casually told him it was just a visit from one of our little friends. The message had the following content. I remember very vividly the details of what the content of the message was. The message revealed that coming out of the ocean, very near the ship, off port bow, a reddish-orange glowing object approximately 70 feet in diameter came out of the water and shot off into space. The ship's radar tracked it. It was going over 7,000 miles an hour. It stuck with me to this day. I worked with some of the personnel that worked at NORAD, and we were talking about UFOs, he said. When I first started working at NORAD, quote, the screens, which were monitoring the radar across the country, all of a sudden something would cross the screen and the scale reading the speed on this thing would go off the scale. And one of the older supervisors advised him, oh, it's just a visit from one of our little friends, like just a normal occurrence. Testimony of Dr. Roberto Pinati, September 2000. In his testimony, Mr. Pinati speaks about the 215 inexplicable UFO events in the Italian Air Force files. He obtained official Italian documents that date back to the 30s, specifically 36, where the then fascist government was handling and documenting UFO sightings. Mussolini was very concerned about these unexpected crafts because of the effect they may have on the Italian Air Force. The documents talk about elongated crafts expelling smaller flying saucer-type UFOs. One sighting happened over the skies of Venice. The Air Force attempted to intercept these crafts but could not, as they were far too fast. Recently, the chief of the intelligence office of the Italian Air Force, General Olivero, spoke about this subject, saying that the problem of the UFOs exists and that the Air Force has been dealing with it since '78. There were even 2 landing traces in Campania near Naples, where the soil was bombarded with high-intensity, high-frequency microwaves. There was another important event documented by the Air Force General Salvador Marcelletti in '76, where in Lecce he was flying and came across a huge green object that appeared over his plane. Soon the UFO took off at tremendous speeds. From the standpoint of the nature of the sightings, the Air Force documents show that we are facing definite real objects and that these objects are detected on radar. The Italian military pilots have encounters in the skies of Italy exactly like the U.S. and elsewhere. When the Italian Air Force says that they have had 215 cases still unexplained, this means that they are UFO sightings which have unknown characteristics. For instance, there are cases of military planes attempting to intercept these objects in the skies of Italy, but these objects go away without the possibility of being intercepted. Recently, we had an Italian Air Force officer speak officially and in uniform about a UFO issue. The speaker was General Olivero. He's the Chief of Intelligence Office in the Italian Air Force, which is in charge of following the UFO cases. He said that problems exist and the Italian Air Force has been handling this difficult issue since 1978. He said that they have a file at least 215 UFO cases and that really there are inexplicable cases. He was also asked officially by the press what he thought on his personal basis. He said that since he's a pilot, he knows serious colleagues and serious pilots who have related encounters with UFOs, and he said, I trust them. In the 90s, we had 2 landing cases in Italy, and both occurred in Campania. Campania is a region near Naples. The landing traces left by these 2 different objects were analyzed in a laboratory by our experts. We got specific results. We discovered that the objects, after their landing, they had really bombarded the surface of the soil with high-intensity, high-frequency microwaves. We could check and define this effect. We then compared these results with the world-famous case of Transen province in France, which occurred in '81, and which is a classic from the point of view. It was very important because when we met When we went to Dulce, we found that the data we saw from these cases were really similar in effect. This is very important. We have a good relationship with the French government body, which researches UFO matters in France. Monsieur Valesco is the head of the governmental body who studies UFO problems in France. The French, they think that the problem is real, that we are confronting a real phenomenon, a technological phenom of unknown nature. The position of the French is extremely open and extremely realistic. Another important case was the Air Force General, he is now retired, General Salvador Marcioletti in 1976, when he was the chief of the flight school of the Italian Air Force in Lecce. He happened to meet a tremendous object during his flight. He said he was flying, and suddenly a green object hovered over him and over his cockpit. He understood that something enormous, huge, was over his plane. He did not know what to do. Seconds later, minutes later, he still doesn't know how long this experience lasted. He suddenly saw this mass take off with tremendous speed. Only after he left the Italian Air Force did he mention the event. From a logical point of view, I don't think that we have anything to fear, because if we were facing hostile beings, surely they would have conquered us or made incredible things happen in the past. They could really. If this has not happened, surely it is because we haven't nothing to fear. Probably there are in every part of the world invisible links with a definite invisible colleague that is keeping this secret. They are dealing with this subject from a standpoint of research secretly in order to have gains in technologies to be applied in various ways. The UFO problem is not only a scientific problem, but it's also an intelligence problem. This is the second important face of the UFO reality. When we begin to understand this, we may understand a lot more things, because all this has to do with power everywhere, in every country, in every government, with every situation. All right, folks, very interesting middle of the night bonus upload. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you for supporting this channel. Your support is what makes this channel so special, and honestly what keeps it growing and going. It is appreciated. The gratitude that I have is unmeasurable. Guys, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there. Share a little bit of information with the people that you love and care about. Just share a little bit of what we share here on a daily basis with each other, and it may just save their life someday. God bless you all.